This podcast is brought to you by the friendly people at Crembo Baked Goods, the San Francisco Bay Area's newest parve non-dairy kosher bakery, proudly serving cookies, loaf cakes, and the best gluten-free challah I've ever had, and much more. Ask about their challah delivery service to schools, organizations, and corporations in the Bay Area. Email them at orders@crembobakedgoods.com for more info, or simply go to Crembo, that's Krembo, bakedgoods.com. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another edition of the Holy Sparks podcast. Saul K here, super excited and grateful for my second time interviewing two authors at the same time. This time they're women, and I know one of them quite well, Mishpacha. And without further ado, let me introduce and edify these women properly. Julie Silverstein is a messaging strategist and former speechwriter for the ambassador for Israel to the United Nations. She graduated from the University of California, Los Angeles, summa cum laude, and Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government as a presidential scholar. She was a Fulbright, BERTELSMANN, and WEXNER Heritage Fellow and attended classes at the Yakar, Beit, Midrash, and Pardes Institute. She grew up in San Francisco and now lives in Jerusalem with her husband and 5 kids. Tami Schlossberg Pruwer is a brand strategist with experience crafting stories in 7 languages. She went to Bar Ilan University and earned an MA in Government and Diplomacy from Reichman University. She is also a graduate of Michlala College and has spent years learning at Matan and Beit, Morasha. She was born in Milan, Italy, and grew up in Antwerp, Belgium. She now lives in Tel Aviv with her husband and 2 children. Ladies, welcome to the Holy Sparks podcast.
Thank you, Saul.
All right, so just for the record, let everyone know where are you tuning in from this evening?
So Tammy and I are both based in Israel. I'm in Jerusalem and Tammy's in Tel Aviv. So it's late by us, early-ish by you. And we're just so happy to connect and be on your podcast. What an honor.
Amazing. So as I mentioned, this is my second time interviewing a pair of authors at the same time. So we'll go back and forth. We'll have some fun. And starting with you, Tami, talk about growing up Jewish in Italy and Belgium.
Oh, wow. Interesting. So, I didn't live in Italy for very long. I left Italy when I was 2.5, and my family have moved to Belgium. I will also say that my grandparents are not originally Italian. They're Holocaust survivors from Poland who ended up in Italy trying to reach Israel after the war, ended up in Italy in transit and, started building a life there and just remained there. So my mother actually grew up there. I was born there. And then when I was 2.5, we moved to Belgium. I now currently live in Tel Aviv with my family, which is definitely a very different environment. I live in one of the most progressive cities in the world, and Jewish life in Belgium was a lot more sheltered, a lot more traditional, I would say. But I think it really shaped who I am. I think I'm always kind of trying to walk that line between the old world and the new world, progress and history and the past. And so it was definitely a sheltered environment, but one that was very enriching and inspiring.
But okay, let me ask one more question just to dig a little bit deeper in there. So how was the Jewish community for you in Belgium, and how would you maybe compare and contrast it to Israel now?
I grew up in Antwerp, which is primarily, the Jewish community there is primarily ultra-Orthodox, so a lot of Haredim, a lot of Hasidim. It's interesting because I was actually, today my daughter is in the 1st grade, my firstborn daughter, Amalia, and it's Aliyah week in Israel this week, and so I was invited to present my Aliyah story to her class, and so I spoke to them a little bit about Belgium, and I showed them the images of Antwerp, and I think it was quite a culture shock for them, these kids learning in a modern Orthodox school in Tel Aviv, but still never having been exposed to that, I think, very traditional ghetto life, which is a lot more prominent, I think, in Antwerp. I was raised in a modern Orthodox environment. It's small, it's minimal, but it exists. And so we had a small modern Orthodox school, a lot of Israeli teachers who would come in for a few years on shlichut, and so we learned Hebrew there as well. There was a youth movement, Bnei Akiva, which I attended. And I think, the one thing I will say is that although there's a lot of diversity there between the types of Jews that you encounter, modern Orthodox, Haredi, Hasidic, secular, They all live in these enclosed quarters, and there's a real sense of unity amongst them. And I think that is probably the biggest difference, where here everybody feels like family, but you feel the divide more between the different sectors in society. And so, yeah, I mean, there was something nice about that, but I do appreciate living in, I think, a more liberal environment.
Okay, beautiful. Speaking of liberal environments, Julie, you grew up in San Francisco. Talk about growing up Jewish in San Francisco.
Well, that's exactly right. I always imagine that I grew up in the future, and I've just spent the rest of my life trying to catch everybody up to what life was like growing up in the city, where so many of the social issues that were that the world and the United States, Israel are debating and wrestling with today were already kind of established fact. And I grew up in also a traditional household. By, I guess, full disclosure, my first cousin is Saul's amazing wife, Ilana. We grew up across the bridge from each other. She grew up in Oakland. I grew up in San Francisco. And they say, you can't pick your family. You can only pick your friends. Well, I pick my family. I have the most amazing family, Alana and Saul and her siblings and my aunts and uncles and all the rest. Two sets of grandparents. My the different sides of my family were as different as Jewish families can be. My father grew up in San Francisco in like an atheist Jewish family. They were a family of Jewish intellectuals. You got to know my grandmother Saul. My fraternal grandmother was an Egyptologist. She taught and researched and studied ancient Egyptian history and led tours to Egypt. My maternal side of the family, which is what I share with Ilana, um, they were Holocaust refugees from Germany who came to San Francisco to rebuild their shattered lives and were Orthodox in practice. My maternal grandmother Shaitels to Jewish women and African American women, and so two sides of the family that were as different as night and day, but shared a love for Judaism, a shared set of values. And my parents met somewhere in the middle and raised us traditional and conservative Jewish practice, Jewish day school, Jewish camps, Jewish youth groups. There was nothing they spared to give us a strong Jewish education. And now we've made our way to Israel because I think that while it was a strong grounding and a strong Jewish life, there was something that was missing for me, and I think I found it in Israel.
Okay, it perfectly dovetails to my next question, which is, I know, Tammy, you mentioned that, I don't know if you said this month is Aliyah month or this week is Aliyah week, but I wanted to hear both of your Aliyah stories in brief. And let's start with you, Tammy.
Well, I think for me, I was raised in a very strong Zionistic environment. Also at school, a lot of our Hebrew teachers were Israeli teachers, and they really instilled in us this love for Israel. My father is actually Israeli and American, so I had a lot of family living here. My grandparents lived here, and we visited a lot growing up. And I think, growing up in Belgium, there was always, I always felt like the world is much bigger than the Jewish life there. And even though it's a very multicultural environment, I wanted more opportunities within Jewish life to grow and to flourish. And so for me, it was a natural choice. I came after high school, I came for a year in seminary, and then I decided to remain and enroll in university here. And so I really started my studies here and my career, and have been here ever since.
Okay, Julie?
Well, we actually haven't yet made Aliyah. We are residents of Israel, but still citizens of the United States. We came to Israel 6 years ago on a 1 year sabbatical. The idea was to come and to work and to live in Israel and to give our kids the opportunity to really learn Hebrew, not Jewish day school, American Jewish day school Hebrew, but to really kind of break their teeth on Hebrew and to get to know their family here and their friends, and not to feel like Israel was a place where they were tourists, that they would feel that Israel was a place that they could call home. and that they would experience an entire year of Jewish holidays and the full cycle of a Jewish calendar year, which is so special and needs to be fully experienced and can only be fully experienced here in Israel. And 1 year turned into 6 years. I'm not quite sure how it all happened, but we came for one and we stayed for six, and now our children have really grown up here, and now they're all fluent and have deep friendships with Israelis, and so do we. And it wasn't the path we expected to take, but here we are, and we love it,
I love
as
it. So,
difficult and tragic as it is.
yeah, it's always it's all the things, right? It's a joy is only experienced when you can experience the contrast. We were just talking about this morning. So, okay, you've been there for 6 years, but not officially Aliyah, meaning like there's another step to take, or you might come back.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still walking, a line between two worlds. Israel has so much promise, so much opportunity, so much joy, and also so much pain, so much tragedy, and so much risk. And we feel that, especially, raising our children here, and the pull that they also feel between two different lives. Our hearts are always with Israel, and our bodies are here, but it's a complicated time. And our oldest is 17, and he's potentially a few months going into the army, and he attends a school in Jerusalem called Himmelfarb that has lost over half a dozen recent graduates. And most recently, the head of school was killed in Lebanon, Rav Avi Goldberg, who was the rabbi of the school, the head of the upper school, and also my son's Tanakh teacher. And that's a lot, to be facing day in and day out. So it's complicated. But we love life here, and to what you said, Saul, about experiencing that band of emotion. I think our lives in Israel just go so much higher and also so much lower. In America, you ask me, how are you? How are you? How's your day? I would say, oh, it's good. I had a good day. It's never amazing, but it's never terrible. And here, you just live with such a wider band, where days can be truly, truly magical. And there's not a day that goes by where I don't experience magic. And there's not a day that goes by where I don't experience some kind of horror.
Let's transition a little bit here. Talk about how you two met.
Oh, wow. We don't even understand how we met. It really felt like there was some sort of divine intervention here. We had both had the idea for this book around the same time, and um, really by chance, Julie had found my email, reached out to me, and we got talking, and we realized that we had the exact same vision for this project, and we're super aligned with how we wanted the outcome to look like. And so we just got going, and we started researching and writing and reaching out to illustrators. So we're the co-authors of Chutzpah Girls, 100 Tales of Daring Jewish Women. It's a book about Jewish women from Tanakh to today, throughout history, throughout the world. It is illustrated by 12 female Jewish artists around the world. Every story comes with an original portrait of the woman itself. And the book is really what connected us, and the vision for this project is really what made us bond. And we feel so fortunate to have embarked on this journey together, and to be at this point right now when it's being published. And I think at the outset we had the goal for this project was really kind of rectifying a historical bias where the stories of women were not necessarily highlighted or told, or were told through a male perspective. But the fact that the book is being published at this point in time really just adds a different layer of meaning to it. And there are so many people out there who are hungry for this kind of Jewish and inspiring content. We've had to have, over the past year, we've had to have the most impossible conversations with our children, trying to explain the reality to them. And so the opportunity to kind of look at our own heritage and history through the lens of heroes and heroines and determination and strength and chutzpah, I think is really what everybody needs at this point in time. And so we're really excited to be releasing it.
I love it. I love it. Julie, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there are a number of things that I would say about the book. I mean, first of all, we made an effort to ensure that we were creating the most beautiful and engaging and diverse book that has ever been written about Jewish women, because they deserve it. Jewish women tell the story of the Jewish experience. The women in this book come from over 30 different countries. They're Bulgarian, they're Indian, they're Ethiopian, they're Yemenite, Mizrahi, Sephardi, Ashkenazi. Between all of these women, they really tell a sweeping story of the arc and the range of the Jewish experience. Um, and the privilege of working on a book during this really challenging time in Jewish life has really transformed both Tami and I. As Tami mentioned, at first we just simply set out to create a beautiful book that would rectify the underrepresentation of Jewish women and Jewish stories, and even some of the discrimination and bias that still exists today within the Jewish world. But after October 7th, it became so much more.
Yeah, I think that this is the one thing that I've been trying to do as well over the past year, which is pan out on our timeline, right? If the present point of contact with reality is really challenging, you have to like look at the 3,000, 3,300 year timeline and realize that we've actually been through a lot worse than this as a people.
Well, that's exactly right, Saul, and I think that's what you come to understand when you read a book like this, that it's Jewish women, throughout history that met moments very similar to the one that we're facing today, and they decided to choose life and to go on. And sometimes they were remarkable for doing something entirely unremarkable, which was simply to get up and to keep going and to love and to marry and to raise children. And sometimes the women in the book went on and did very exceptional things. They revolutionized their fields. They invented. They made extraordinary professional contributions. And when we came to understand that as researchers and authors, it changed the way that we walk through the world too, because we realized that we were not alone. And you, when you're walking through this time, with Jewish women by your side, you walk through the world differently.
I love it. I'm thinking of just going through the holiday of Sukkot and inviting in the Ushpizin and what that feels like in the Sukkah. And you're taking it to the next level, which is really taking the Ushpizin with you on the derech, right, as you're walking. That's beautiful.
Mhm.
Okay, so I haven't read the whole book, but everything I've read has been such a delight. I must say, wherever you're listening to this, hearing this, it is a welcome respite from things that are happening in the world to read about incredible women doing amazing things throughout history. I mean, by three stories in, you're just feeling uplifted and motivated. And I'm definitely giving this to all my B'nai Mitzvah students going forward as well. You should. It should be on everyone's coffee table. And I have to ask you, so Julie, in your bio in the book, it says that your favorite chutzpah girl is, I hope I pronounced this correctly, Gluckel of Hamlin, who I learned about, who I believe lived in the 16th century and wrote a diary having 14 kids, and is one of the first, as far as I know, recorded diaries of women. But why is she your favorite chutzpah girl?
Mm. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk a little bit about her. So I have, as you know, I have five young children, and I love how Gluckel managed to write this series of diaries with 14 children at home, while running a business, while balancing marriage and family life. And she was widowed at a fairly young age, and still managed to keep writing. And her diaries, which were written in Yiddish, are important historical artifacts today that explain what Jewish life was like during that time. But for me personally, I found it so empowering to see a woman, a mother, finding the time to write, finding the time to do more with her time, finding the cracks of time, because we can only imagine that to be able to write and to do anything much, it couldn't have been easy during her time and during her life. And for Tami and I, the process of writing this book was very similar. We didn't have the opportunity to go away on a 3-month writers retreat to some mountain paradise. We were both working, we were both raising children, we're both, living here in Israel with all its challenges, Corona, maternity leaves. Both of us had babies in the midst of working on this book, and then the war, which has sent both of us running back and forth to shelters in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv with our families. So that's a long way of saying we had to write this book in the cracks of time. It was messy, it was challenging, and we hope that all the men and women who are listening to this out there will remember that you cannot postpone your dreams. You cannot postpone your ambitions. You're not going to find a perfect moment where the clouds part and the path's clear and everything is easy for you. And I think Saul, and I don't know how many of the listeners out there know that Saul, in addition to being a podcast host, is also a rabbinical student. I mean, I think you're a great example of that because, you have a busy family life. You are constantly touring with your music. You're working for the synagogue and doing so many things. And you said, you know what? This is a dream of mine and I'm going to do it. And you did.
Thank you so much. I really, if anything, the last year has probably showed all of us we're capable of a lot more, right? We are. And we have incredible resilience within us. And in the cracks of your time in your life, you can do amazing things. Okay, Tami, now to you. Why is Flora Sassoon your favorite chutzpah girl?
Okay, so maybe I'll give a little bit of background information for the listeners who are less familiar with Flora Sassoon. She was a woman originally from a Jewish Baghdadi family who was raised in India at the end of the 19th century and has received from her family a very high-level formal education, but grew up in a very traditional society, in a very traditional Jewish family, and so she marries young, has 3 children, and then is widowed at a very young age. And she decides to take over the family business once her husband passes away. There were other male family members who could have done it, but she insists and takes charge and really creates an empire. Is highly successful in the business world. And alongside that, she's also a highly educated and learned Jewish scholar. There is a correspondence between her and some of the most prominent rabbis at the time. And she's just able to be fully immersed in both those worlds simultaneously and extremely influential, both in the business and political arena, but also in Jewish life at a time where not when many women had the opportunity or the courage to do so. And she has really revolutionized, I think, a lot of things in Jewish life. She was one of the first women to be invited to address the Rabbinic Congress in the UK, the only Jewish woman. And then in India, she also fights for women's rights, not only Jewish rights, but also petitions the government to ban the purdah, the veil that forces women to cover her face. So she's really an activist. She takes her sense of responsibility very seriously as an influential businesswoman. And she's just one of these remarkable women who seems to have been able to do it all and just balance all of these different worlds so magically.
I love it. I'm thinking of a theme that I picked up on in maybe the first 10 stories, which was that none of the women, and maybe this changes throughout the book, I'm not sure, but it seems that there is a theme of women not only doing what they needed to do in the world, not only transforming things, but holding their level of observance or holding their beliefs or holding their practice, right? Is that a theme throughout the book, and was that intentional?
Well, that was important to us all in terms of our selection, that the women that we included in the book were not incidentally Jewish. They weren't just sort of born Jewish and just sort of happened to be Jewish, but that all the women in the book were proudly Jewish, were openly Jewish. They lived Jewish lives, they lived according to Jewish values, and they made Jewish choices. So you see this again and again through their stories that they're doing what they're doing not in spite of their Judaism, but as a result of their Judaism and their identity and their values.
Anything you want to add to that, Tami?
I'd I'd like to say that in addition to that parameter, we also made sure that the stories that we included were stories of women who are really inclusive and not divisive. You know, we tried to be edgy. We tried to bring the stories of women who have done remarkable things. We've tried to balance the iconic women who are more well known and the lesser known stories to try to shine the spotlight on that. But we wanted to make sure that this would be a book that, you know, everybody connects to within the Jewish world. And so yes, driven by Jewish values, but also stories of inclusivity.
I love it, which leads to my next question, which is what is your vision for this book? Julie, we'll start with you.
We see Chutzpah Girls as the beginning of a Jewish girls' empowerment brand, movement, social enterprise. It's book first, but we have many things that we want to do. So first of all, we would love to, after this book, continue to tell more stories of Jewish women. We would love to do a follow-up book. We would love to do a light chapter series. We'd love to do a podcast, All You Can Teach Us How. We'd love to do an app. We want to get more stories of Jewish women out into the world. But more broadly, uh, we want to empower Jewish girls, and that means so many things in terms of Judaism, their financial literacy, their philanthropic literacy, their mental health, their physical health, and beyond. It takes a lot to be a chutzpah girl. You need to have strengths in a lot of different areas, and we want to see more Jewish women come into positions of leadership in the Jewish world and beyond. So we hope that the book will inspire that and a number of other activities as well. We're working with a producer right now to turn the book into a screenplay. We'd love to bring Hutzpah Girls to the stage and to the big screen and beyond. And we have 100 gorgeous original portraits by Jewish female artists that we want to take on the road. We'd love to do pop-up art exhibitions. We'd love to be in museums. We want the world to see these incredible Jewish women and be inspired by their stories.
I love it. Tami, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, in addition to all of the practical goals that we have, I think what we really hope that this book will spark is that connection and those conversations within families that are really important right now. There's an intergenerational component to the book where it's a book that is age appropriate for a younger audience, but I think it's also very interesting and innovative for adults. And so I think it could really spark so many conversations about your own history, your own values, your own family. You know, even through the process of researching and writing this book, there are so many things that I discovered about my own heritage and my own past and some of the places that I lived in and the Jewish history there that I was not aware of at all. And there's just so much in here that can connect us to our immediate families, but also our broader Jewish family. And we really hope that that unlocks those types of conversations for all families.
When can we expect the book to be out and who's publishing it?
Pre-sales opened 3 days ago, and the book will be available on November 25th, 2024, so 1 month before Hanukkah. And the publisher is the Toby Press. It's an imprint of Koren Publishers, a Jerusalem-based publisher, highly experienced Jewish book publisher. They create very high quality and beautifully designed Jewish books in a range of topics from, you know, traditional Tanakhs to illustrated Jewish books to Jewish history books. And so they have an extremely high level professional team of editors and illustrators and content producers at the publishing house. And we feel very fortunate to have been able to work with them.
Amazing. I'll have links below, of course, leading to your book. Transitioning a little bit, you know, they say you're always supposed to live with the times. So you may have heard there's an election happening today in America. So, you know, you might have read on the news somewhere. And depending on how fast I get this episode out, I might leave this one in or not. But what, if any, thoughts, effect do you think this election will have on Israel? Anything you want to say about it, I would be fascinated to hear.
I'd actually love to talk, if that's okay. I'd love to talk about a Chutzpah girl that I was thinking about today because of the election. We don't live in the US, and so I'm not voting today, but I was thinking about Eliza Davis, who was originally a woman who was born in Jamaica and then moves to England with her husband. And they end up buying Charles Dickens' home. She's the daughter of a cantor, and she's a mom of 10. She's a housewife. And she starts reading kind of like, in those cracks of times that we spoke about before, she starts reading Charles Dickens' books and she falls in love with him as an author until she arrives at Oliver Twist, and she comes across the character of Fagin, the Jew, who is portrayed very negatively in Charles Dickens' literature. And, he's called the Jew over 250 times in the books, always with a negative portrayal. And she describes how it feels like a stab in the heart every single time. And she decides to pick up a pen and write a letter to Charles Dickens. And she writes him a very heartfelt letter and reminds him of his responsibility as one of England's most popular authors at the time. And she manages, through her respectful dialogue, to change his mind. And I think what is remarkable about her story is, the fact that she was able to do this just by the power of a pen, with respectful dialogue, and to change his mind. And that is something that in our polarized world, we really come across so rarely. And that story was on my mind today. And I think my only hope for post-election is that we remain unified in the ways that we can, and that it doesn't drive us apart more than the divide and the polarization that we're already feeling. And there are many examples in the book of women who have inspired unity. And I hope that that is the message that people will take post-election as well.
Beautiful. Julie, I think you're voting in America too, yeah?
Yeah, I am voting. We did vote. We filled out our ballots a few days ago, and we had them mailed to the U.S. Um, all eyes are on America today, and we're all praying that that the election and democracy hold strong and robust, and the day should proceed peacefully. We connect to the election today through a number of the women who are featured in the book. Another name that comes to mind is Bella Abzug, who was a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, and so famously said, "A woman's place is in the House of Representatives." That's not to say that we're condemning or condoning any of the candidates. We're a nonpartisan book. But there are exceptional stories in the book of Jewish female leadership, and someone like Bella Abzug is unique because that impetus for leadership was already evident at a very young age. Her father died when I think she was probably about 11 or 12 years old. She went to synagogue to say Kaddish for him, and the rabbi kind of shooed her away and said, "You really have no business being here. Girl doesn't have to say Kaddish." And she said, "This is where I'm going to be, and I'm going to say Kaddish for my father." And she stood up for her rights and her place in the synagogue. And she is kind of president of her high school, president of her college, and goes on to really lead the feminist movement and holds positions of elected leadership, and is really just an extraordinary and iconic leader. She always wears these dramatic, wide-brimmed hats. So she had not only a flair for words and for action, but also for fashion. She's a character. So I would say to all the girls out there, you can begin to be leaders even at a very young age, to stand up for what you believe in, and to not let that sense of conviction and forcefulness die out, but to continue to lead.
And
Sweet.
I'd love to add to that and just say that, many of the women in the book, they weren't born or groomed to be leaders. They all really just kind of stood up in a moment of challenge and rose to the occasion. And that is how they left their legacy. And, at a time like this where the Jewish world is fighting this war on so many fronts, and everybody has their own way of contributing. I think that's a really important message, that we all have the leadership skills within us. If we connect to our inner chutzpah and really connect to what it is that inspires us or awakens us or enrages us, and act on that. And I think that is an inspiring message to take from the book as well, that we can all contribute in our own way.
Exactly. Moses didn't go to University of Tel Aviv to learn leadership. He just on the job training. And if you look at every other leader in the Torah, it's the same, right? They just did it, right? What I love about the Torah is there are some angels in there, but mostly it's about humans, right? And mostly it's about humans doing incredible things through incredible grit and faith and
Mhm.
completely messing up along the way too, right? It's what an incredible gift.
And we made a point of including stories, from the Tanakh through the contemporary era. We are often more familiar with some of the contemporary loud and proud Jewish figures that are around us, but we often don't think about the women in the Tanakh as Hutzpah girls. We included in the book all of the matriarchs, all the prophetesses, women like Ruth, Naomi, Yael, Tamar, Dvorah, and women who are named in the Talmud, like Bruria and Yalta, women in the medieval period. And I think that it's important for young for girls and boys today to encounter them alongside figures from the contemporary era. So we made a point not to order the book chronologically, so you'd have a sense of like going into a kind of a black and white sepia tone past and moving into a brighter, colorful future. The book moves back and forth through time, and you have the opportunity to encounter women from history alongside contemporary women, and it inculcates a feeling of discovery and curiosity.
I love it. I actually really enjoyed how the time shifts. Right? Going back and forth, it creates a link between the present and the past, which is very important, and it makes the past present, if that makes sense.
And I'll add that we open with a timeline of Jewish history just to anchor the reader in those different eras to begin with, so that even when you have that link and you're kind of moving back and forth, you can always circle back and try and understand where you are at any moment in time. So the order exists, even though we kind of weave through it in non-chronological order.
Yeah, it's a great key that you have in the beginning. Okay, so a couple more questions. Give us a snapshot of the feeling in your life in Israel now, almost 13 months into the war. What can you tell? Because people in America, there's all kinds of news sources, and most of which you can't really trust to know what's actually going on. What does it feel like for you?
It's a hard question to answer when you're living through it. I think to a certain extent you have to disconnect and disassociate from what's really happening in order to be able to just live your lives on a daily basis. I think if you're constantly thinking about it, it makes it really hard to just get through the day. And so yes, of course, there is, great concern, and there are a lot of questions that Israelis have as well. But I think, it's important to also live our lives and continue our routines and create a stable anchor for our children, so that they can grow up with hopefully pleasant memories from this time, and not only scary ones and traumatic ones. But I will say that there has, we've been asked a lot about the importance of the book for this moment in time, and I think that one very big topic that we've seen was how Jewish women's organizations throughout the world have not stood up for Israeli women at this point in time. And I think it highlights the importance of this book and the stories that remind us that Jewish women have been discriminated against throughout history as women and as Jews. And we're seeing that happen again now. And I think having this book to remind us of our power as well, and not just of our invisibility, is more important than ever. And so that is, something hopeful that we're hoping to put out there in a way that will give Jewish women and Israeli women the strength to kind of reconnect to themselves, to their roots, to their heritage, and feel seen.
And I would add to that, Saul, that I I would say that this was a book that was being researched and written through October 7th. It wasn't something that happened kind of alongside it, but was shaped a lot by the events that were happening all around us. And I'll give you some examples of how the book changed. One is that we altered the list of the women that were included in the book. After October 7th, we decided to take out a few of the women and we added a few women, some of the heroines of October 7th, like Rachel Edry, the cookie Safta, the cookie warrior from Ofakim, who was returning back to her home after sheltering with her husband in a public shelter, and moments later, terrorists come through her windows and take her and her husband hostage for a very a terrifying day ordeal, and she draws upon her strength and grace and strategic mindset as a woman and offers the terrorists hospitality. She feeds them cookies that she had made just hours earlier for her husband, who was celebrating his birthday. And she gives them tea and she gives them coffee and she bandages their wounded hands. All the while, she's communicating with the police who are gathered outside her home and sent them signals to indicate how many men were inside the home to aid in a rescue effort that was ultimately successful. Another woman that we added to the book was Inbal Lieberman, who was the head of kibbutz security of kibbutz Nir Am. She was the first woman in the Shar HaNegev area, in the Otef area, to lead kibbutz security. She was a former combat soldier. She grew up in kibbutz Nir Am. She knew every inch of the land. She was well qualified. And on the morning of October 7th, around 6:30 in the morning, she hears the sirens go off like others did around the country, and she's not getting clear indication about how to proceed. She wasn't getting communication from the army about what to do and how to handle the security for her kibbutz. So she goes to the armory. She prepares the weapons. She gathers a 12-man volunteer security team. She places them strategically along the kibbutz border. She goes home to home in the kibbutz to make sure that the families are sheltering in place, and she manages successfully to withhold any infiltration from the terrorists for over 8 hours until army reinforcements arrived. And there were other ways that the book was affected. We worked with 12 different artists. Some of them were displaced from their homes during the process of creating the art and creating this book. And so you can imagine that workflow changes when you're working with artists who are not in their homes, and they're homeless, and they're wandering and they're traveling, and they're trying to get their lives in order. And some of the members of our staff and the publishing team, some of the publishing team members were called up to Miluim, and so there were, of course, delays. So this, I would say, was not incidental to October 7th and to all the events that are happening around us, but we're very much shaped by it, as we were shaped by the book and the time as well.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you both for your time. I know you're very busy women with families and careers, and I know it takes a lot to do what you have done, so Yasher Koach. But I want to ask you both one final question that I ask every guest on the Holy Sparks podcast. And we'll start with you, Tami. What does the Jewish world need now most, and why?
Unity, because that is when we're the strongest, and female leaders.
It says in Pirkei Avot that you should find of yourself a teacher, and we would like to add to that and say, find of yourselves a heroine or a hero. That in this dark moment that we should all, as you said, Saul, be able to zoom up to a higher elevation and to see ourselves in a wider historical context, and to find from our history heroes to guide you and to light your path in these dark times.
Amazing. Well, I always want to end with a blessing, and Hashem should bless you, Julie and Tami, with great success in this book, which I know is already going to be a grand slam national, international bestseller. It's going to be on everyone's coffee table that I personally know. I can guarantee you that. And that it should inspire a whole generation of leaders, both coming up and both that are already grown up, that they should inspire both men and women to tap into their own internal hero or heroine because we all have that inside of us. All these people in your book were people, right, that just decided to tap into the extra gifts that Hashem gave them. And by reading this book, I hope that you will continue to inspire our Jewish community to be the heroes that we are. And I want to thank you so much for your time. God bless.
And
Amen.
thank
Thank you
you so much
so.
for that blessing, and thank you for having us.
So we wouldn't be Hutzpah girls ourselves if we didn't ask you who's your favorite Hutzpah girl.
Oh, that's a great question. My wife, but I must also add my daughter Bela because she is such a chutzpah girl that in preschool, her teachers would tell us that Bela was adjunct faculty. When they needed to like take a break, they'd say, Bela, you can lead. So I'm surrounded by very, very strong women, and I'm very grateful for that. Okay, Tammy, question for you. What does chutzpah mean to you?
So that's a great question, Saul. And I think the beauty is that chutzpah it doesn't have one definition. It can mean so many different things. In the book, we open with a definition for chutzpah, and if you'd like, I can read it to you now, and then we can elaborate on it. So, in the beginning of the book, we define chutzpah as a Jewish superpower, the daring to speak when silenced, to take action when others won't, to try when they say it's impossible, to persevere in times of doubt, to be yourself when it's easier to conform, to stand tall when made to feel small, to believe when it all feels hopeless, and to shine your light in the face of darkness. And then we continue with a quote from the Talmud Yerushalmi, which is the only time that we actually found the word chutzpah mentioned in Jewish sources. And this is how it goes. It says, Rabbi Zeira said, "Come and see what chutzpah the land of Israel has, that it produces fruit in barren land." And I think for us, that really summed it up, that audacity to thrive and blossom in the harshest conditions, which women had to do throughout history, facing double discrimination as women and as Jews. And so when we saw that, we knew that that would be the definition for us. But we broadened it a little bit, I think, to highlight the fact that there isn't one kind of chutzpah, and chutzpah comes in all shapes and forms, and different moments require different types of chutzpah. And so it's really about having that courage to show up in the world, connected to who you are and own it, and contribute from that place.
I love it. Okay, I'm gonna share my favorite joke. So this lady gets on the bus, but she doesn't have bus fare. She says, bus driver, look, if you had what I had, you would let me on this bus. He says, oh, come on in, ma'am, come on in. So she goes on the bus and she walks to the back of the bus and it's pretty crowded. And so she says, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, if you had what I had, you would make way for me to let me to the back of the bus. So everyone, makes way for her. She goes to the back of the bus. There's no place to sit down. She says this, ladies and gentlemen, if you had what I had, you would get up and give me a seat in the back of the bus. So she sits down. So finally she gets to her stop and she's walking out. On the way out, the bus driver says, excuse me, ma'am, do you mind me asking, what is it that you have? She looks him in the eyes and she says, Chutzpah.
Love it.